8-year-old triplets prayed at their mother's grave and found the father they never knew. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. The sun was dim behind a veil of gray clouds, casting long shadows across the Forest Lawn Cemetery in Los Angeles. The winter wind was sharp but oddly still, as though the world itself had paused to mourn. Among the crowd of black coats, polished shoes, and discreet tears stood a man who, in any other place, would have commanded the room. But here, Richard Hale, tech magnate, billionaire entrepreneur, and Forbes cover regular, was just a grieving widower. His wife, Evelyn, had been everything to him. His balance in a world full of chaos, the voice that calmed storms he didn't even know were inside him. Her sudden passing from a brain aneurysm left a crater in his life so vast, even the weight of his wealth felt like dust. He hadn't cried at the hospital, not during the long night alone in their Seattle home afterward, not even when arranging the funeral with cold, transactional precision. But now, as the mahogany casket was slowly lowered into the ground, something inside him began to fracture. The priest spoke of peace, of eternity, of Evelyn's grace and strength, but Richard heard none of it. He stared at the casket, willing it to open, wishing for just one more hour, one more chance to say the things that now circled like ghosts in his mind. The crowd stood in reverent silence as roses were laid gently on the coffin. Muffled whispers, hollow condolences. One by one, people drifted away. Friends, colleagues, acquaintances, their faces blurred. Only Richard remained, shoulders stiff, hands in the pockets of his black wool coat, watching the last scoop of dirt cover what was once his entire world. And then he saw them. 3 little girls, maybe 7 or 8, stood beneath the low-hanging limbs of a massive oak tree not far from Evelyn's grave. Their coats were navy blue, their boots scuffed, and their auburn hair was tied into identical braids. They stood in perfect stillness, hands clasped, wide eyes fixed on him. There was something eerie and surreal about the way they didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't whisper, just watched. Richard's heart skipped. He blinked. Once, twice, but they were still there. His first instinct was that they were some mourner's children, perhaps wandering off while their parents said their goodbyes. But something was off. He'd seen every face at the funeral, and he would have remembered them. Triplets. Identical, silent, unmoving. One of them, he couldn't tell which. They were so alike. Took a step forward, then another. Her small black boots crunched softly on the frost-touched grass. But before she could cross the invisible line between mystery and confrontation, the other 2 girls reached for her hands, and together, in perfect synchronicity, they turned and disappeared behind the tree. Richard stood frozen, as though some ancient part of him had been stirred from slumber. He wasn't a man prone to superstition, but he'd built empires on instinct, and this instinct was screaming. Something about those girls felt personal, familiar in a way that didn't make sense. "Sir?" a voice broke his trance. His driver, Martin, stood respectfully at a distance, holding the door of the town car open. "The car is ready when you are." Richard glanced one last time toward the tree. The girls were gone. Not even the rustle of leaves remained. That night, back in his penthouse overlooking the glittering skyline of Seattle, Richard sat in the dark. The fireplace crackled, untouched whiskey sweating in his hand. He didn't touch his food, didn't check his phone. Instead, he stared at a framed photo of Evelyn on the mantel, taken on their last vacation together in Tuscany. She was laughing, wind in her hair, sun on her skin, hand reaching for his. "I saw something today," he whispered to her image, his voice breaking for the first time in days. Or maybe someone. He closed his eyes, but instead of peace, the image of 3 little girls standing by a grave haunted him. Who were they? Why were they watching him? And why, when he looked into their eyes, did it feel like looking into a reflection of a past he never dared revisit? If you felt that chill, that moment where life twists in ways you can't explain, then you know something more is coming. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe to our channel and stay with us as we uncover the emotional, powerful journey behind this mysterious encounter. Your support helps us share more heartfelt stories like this one. 2 days had passed since Evelyn's funeral, yet Richard Hale couldn't shake the image of those 3 girls. He had tried to write them off as children of distant mourners, attendees slipping through memory gaps softened by grief, but the truth refused to settle. His gut told him otherwise. Their synchronized stillness, the way they stared at him, there was something deliberate in it, something haunting, and haunting things didn't vanish without reason. By the 3rd night, Richard gave in. He called his longtime personal assistant, Mary Ann, a woman who had worked for him so long she knew how to anticipate his moods before he could speak them aloud. "I need you to find someone," he said without preamble. Actually, 3 someones. Mary Ann didn't ask for context. She never did. He described the triplets in detail. Their hair, their coats, their location during the service. They were standing near the Western Oak, just beyond Section E at Forest Lawn. Not part of the funeral party. I want to know who they are, why they were there. There was a pause on the line. Then quietly, "I'll look into it." That night, sleep evaded him again. Instead, he wandered through the empty halls of his home, pausing in Evelyn's study, the scent of her lavender candle still faint in the air. He touched the spines of her favorite books, ran his fingers across the desk where she wrote in her journal every morning. He didn't cry, but he felt everything else. By morning, Mary Ann had already called back. "I found them," she said. Richard sat up, heart thumping. "Their names are Lila, Lucy, and Lana Whitaker, 8 years old. They live in Pasadena with their maternal aunt. Their mother," she paused, delicately. "Her name was Anna Whitaker." The name struck him like a blow to the chest. Anna. Richard's breath caught. He rose slowly from the bed, one hand pressed against the wall for support. "I knew her," he murmured, as if confessing it to himself for the first time in a decade. It had been 10 years since he last saw Anna. She was a writer, too, bright-eyed, fiercely independent, and honest to a fault. They had met at a tech conference of all places. He, a keynote speaker in the middle of a product launch whirlwind. She, freelancing for an arts magazine that had no interest in his industry, but loved human stories. They had shared a drink, then dinner, then weeks of stolen moments in quiet corners of LA. He remembered how she made him laugh, how she saw right through his carefully curated persona and wasn't impressed. She didn't want anything from him. Not his money, not his fame, just his time. He couldn't give her that. He'd left for London just 2 months later, chasing the largest deal of his career. She hadn't asked him to stay. He hadn't asked her to wait. They hadn't spoken since. Now she was gone, and she had 3 daughters, triplets. Richard's head spun. When did she die? He asked. 3 months ago. Complications from a rare autoimmune disorder. Sudden. The girls are under the care of their aunt, Margaret Whitaker. She's a nurse at a local clinic, single, no children of her own. Do they know who their father is? Another pause. Not publicly. There's no record of paternity on their birth certificates. But Anna's medical file included a sealed personal letter addressed to her daughters, stored at the hospital. It was delivered to Margaret after Anna's passing. I haven't been able to get access to it. Richard stood in the center of his kitchen, unmoving. His hands clenched the edge of the marble countertop until his knuckles whitened. The years compressed into one brutal realization. While he had been building a billion-dollar legacy, the woman he once loved had been raising his children alone. Triplets. His daughters. Where do they go to school? He asked quietly. St. Catherine's Elementary in Pasadena, 2nd grade. They're well-behaved, quiet, top of their class, especially in reading. They take ballet on Wednesdays and Fridays at a local studio. It's not much, but I've sent you their full profiles. Richard swallowed the lump in his throat. Thank you, Marianne. He ended the call and stood in silence. 8 years. He had daughters for 8 years and never knew. A storm raged inside him. Guilt, shock, awe. But beneath it all, something raw and unfamiliar, a fragile thread of hope. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know if he would be welcome, if he deserved to be. But he knew one thing with painful certainty. He had to see them again. Richard Hale found himself parked across the street from St. Catherine's Elementary the following Monday afternoon. His fingers drummed anxiously on the leather-wrapped steering wheel of his Audi. Dressed in a simple gray sweater and jeans, he looked more like a reluctant parent than a mogul worth hundreds of millions. But the truth was, he had no idea what a parent was supposed to look like or feel like. He watched children spill from the school gates in pairs and trios, laughter echoing through the parking lot. Teachers waved, parents gathered, the air buzzing with the familiar chaos of dismissal. And then, there they were. Lila, Lucy, Lana, 3 small girls, identical in every way. But even from a distance, Richard could begin to tell them apart. Lila walked with purpose, her backpack tight against her shoulders, head slightly higher than the others. Lucy lagged a few steps behind, eyes darting between the cracks in the pavement as if memorizing the world. And Lana, she turned and said something that made the others laugh, her ponytail bouncing with each step. Richard's throat tightened. He hadn't imagined it. They were real, his. He wasn't ready to approach them. Not yet. But watching them now, seeing them in the ordinary rhythm of their lives, he realized how much he had already missed. Their first steps, first words, first days of school, all the mundane miracles of growing up, gone. Margaret Whitaker emerged from the school gates minutes later, walking briskly, a canvas tote slung over one shoulder. She looked exhausted, but composed, her dark hair pulled into a low bun. The girls ran to her and hugged her waist, talking all at once, voices tumbling over each other. Margaret smiled, listening patiently, then took their hands and guided them toward the car parked at the curb. Richard didn't follow, not yet. That night, he sat in his study, rereading the profiles Marianne had compiled. He couldn't stop staring at their school photos. Each girl smiled the same, wide, slightly crooked, the corners of their mouths curling up as if they were on the edge of laughter. They had Anna's eyes, but something in the lines of their faces, the way their brows tilted just slightly when they smiled. That was him. He clicked to the next file. A scanned letter. Meredith's sealed message to her daughters. It had taken a favor from an old friend at the hospital to get it. Richard read the letter slowly, every word hitting like a whisper from a woman he never stopped remembering. My darlings, if you're reading this, then it means the hardest moment of my life has arrived. She spoke of love, of sacrifice, of a decision made not out of bitterness, but protection. She had known he would become something bigger than she could offer, and she didn't want to be the weight that changed his course. She never told him, not because she didn't believe he would care, but because she feared he might resent it. Richard closed the file, his hand shaking slightly. She had believed in him, maybe more than he deserved. And in her silence, she'd carried everything. The birth, the sleepless nights, the scraped knees, the first fevers, the bedtime stories. Alone, he had failed her, and he was dangerously close to failing them too. He had to find a way to be part of their lives, carefully, gently, not like a storm tearing through their world, but like a seed quietly rooting itself in the corner of a garden. The next day, he called Margaret. Her voice was wary when she picked up. Yes? Hi, my name is Richard Hale. I knew Anna years ago. Silence. I met your nieces at the cemetery, he continued, voice trembling slightly. They were standing near the oak. I couldn't stop thinking about them. I didn't know. About the girls. About Anna. Another pause. Then slowly, Margaret said, "Why are you calling?" "Because I want to help. I don't expect anything in return. I want to do right by them. And by Anna." "I don't think that's your place anymore," she said quietly. "You left. You didn't know she was pregnant. That's not your fault. But these girls have been through enough. They don't need a stranger showing up with guilt and good intentions." "I understand," Richard said. "But if there's any chance, any small chance, that I can be part of their world, even a little, I'd like to earn it. No pressure, no expectations, just a coffee with you." Silence stretched again. Then quietly Margaret said, "One coffee." Richard closed his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The small coffee shop on Tremont Street smelled like cinnamon and quiet resolve. Richard arrived early, choosing a table by the window, heart thudding with anticipation and a fear he couldn't name. He hadn't felt this nervous before board meetings, not even when he'd stood in front of billion-dollar acquisitions or journalists waiting to devour his words. But now, waiting for a woman who had every right to send him away, he felt like a boy again, uncertain, exposed. Margaret arrived 5 minutes late, her expression unreadable, her steps slow but certain. She wore a navy trench coat and a scarf wrapped snugly around her neck. She didn't look like someone curious. She looked like someone on guard, a soldier in civilian clothes. "Mr. Hale," she said, not unkindly, just distant. "Please, call me Richard," he offered, rising. She didn't return the smile, but she sat across from him and laid her phone on the table like a boundary marker. The waiter approached. She ordered tea. Richard stuck with black coffee. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the ambient hum of the cafe. "I want to start by saying thank you," Richard began, his voice low and deliberate, "for taking care of them, for raising them. I can't imagine what it cost you." Margaret nodded, but her gaze didn't soften. "Anna was my sister. I would have done it no matter the cost. He nodded. I understand. No, you don't, she said sharply. Because if you did, you wouldn't be sitting here hoping to squeeze your way into their lives now. Richard took a slow breath. You're right. I don't understand fully. I missed everything. Their first words, their birthdays, their questions about where their mother went. I missed being there when Anna was sick, when she... He stopped, swallowing the weight pressing against his throat. I missed everything, but I don't want to keep missing them. I don't want to pretend like I haven't spent every night for weeks trying to understand what kind of man she thought I'd become. Margaret's eyes flickered. That line, subtle but sincere, had landed. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. Not from you, not from them. I just want to be near enough to earn the chance to give them something, even if that's just showing up when I say I will. She stirred her tea with slow, careful movements. They think you're a friend of their mother's. That's how I explained it when they saw you at the grave. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't know how else to frame it. That's okay, Richard said quickly. That's more than I could have hoped for. Margaret finally looked at him. Really looked. They're good girls, smart. Lila reads everything she can get her hands on. Lucy's curious in a quiet way. She takes things apart just to see how they work. And Lana's the heart of them. She can sense when something's wrong even before I do. Richard smiled softly. They sound extraordinary. They are. And I've worked hard to keep their lives as normal as possible. They've already lost the most important person in their world. I won't let anyone else walk in and confuse them. Or worse, hurt them. I'm not here to hurt them, Richard said, his voice steady now. I know I'm not their father in their eyes. I know I haven't earned that title, but I was theirs from the moment Anna brought them into the world, even if I didn't know it. Margaret leaned back, eyes narrowing. Why now? Why are you really here? Richard paused, then looked out the window as the question settled into the space between them. Because I lost the woman who once asked me to choose love over ambition. And I said no. And now I've lost her. But I've been given something I didn't deserve. A second chance to say yes. For the first time, Margaret didn't respond right away. Her silence wasn't a rejection this time, but a consideration. I'm not asking to barge in, he continued. Just a little time. Maybe I can come to one of their art showcases or their school play. Whatever you think is okay. I just want to see who they're becoming. Margaret sighed. They have a school recital next Thursday. Lucy plays violin. The other two do a skit. If you sit in the back and keep your distance, I won't stop you. Richard blinked, surprised. Thank you. Her mouth twitched into the shadow of a smile. Don't thank me yet. If they sense anything off, they'll shut you out before you get a word in. And if you hurt them, I'll make sure you never see them again. Richard nodded solemnly. Fair. They finished their drinks in silence. But something had shifted. Not a welcome, but a door. Not wide open, but unlocked. And for Richard Hale, that was more than he had dared to hope for. Under the dim stage lights of the Lexington Elementary Auditorium, Richard Hale sat in the last row, hands clasped tightly in his lap. It was a Thursday evening, unlike any other. Parents filled the seats in clusters, some whispering excitedly, others busy recording the decorated stage with their phones. But Richard wasn't here as a businessman or a billionaire. He was just a man quietly hoping for a sliver of connection to the three little girls he had only recently discovered were his daughters. His heart pounded as he scanned the program in his hand. their names printed in childlike font: Lila Weston, violin solo; Lucy Weston, The Inventor's Dream; skit; Lana Weston, The Inventor's Dream; skit. Their performances were back to back. Margaret had kept her word and texted him the recital details earlier in the week. "Keep to the back. Don't approach them afterward," she'd written. "They don't know yet." And so he sat in silence, surrounded by strangers, watching a world that might one day include him. The lights dimmed, and the chatter faded into expectant hush. A spotlight cast a golden glow on the small figure stepping onto the stage. Lila. Her long auburn hair was tied in a neat braid down her back, her tiny frame almost lost behind the full-size violin she carried. Richard leaned forward unconsciously. She adjusted the chin rest, took a breath, and began to play. The first notes were tentative, a little shaky, but quickly found their rhythm. She played Edelweiss, soft, aching, and full of fragile beauty. The kind of performance that came from someone who didn't just know the notes, but felt every vibration of the string. Richard had never heard anything so heartbreaking or beautiful in his life. He didn't notice the tears until one slipped down his cheek. No one else seemed to be watching him. All eyes were on the child bathed in stage light, channeling something that seemed too big for someone so small. When Lila finished, there was a heartbeat of silence before applause erupted. She gave a polite, almost shy bow, then stepped away from the center. Next came Lucy and Lana, dressed in matching gray overalls, their hair tied back in twin ponytails, though Lucy's glasses gave her away. The skit was playful, but it had depth. Lucy played an inventor who dreamed of building something that could bring people together, while Lana played her skeptical sister, teasing and questioning. They were funny, really funny, and earnest in a way only children could be. At one point, Lucy proclaimed, "Sometimes you don't know what you need until you find it right in front of you." And Richard felt like someone had punched the air from his lungs. The audience laughed and clapped as the skit ended. The girls bowed, holding hands, a snapshot of innocence and unity. He couldn't move. He didn't trust his legs to carry him just yet. After the recital, the hallway buzzed with energy. Parents handed flowers, took pictures, hugged their children. Richard kept to the shadows, just as he promised. But from across the room, he saw them. The three of them gathered near a corkboard where someone had pinned their drawings. Margaret stood a few feet behind, observing like a silent guardian. Lana turned unexpectedly, eyes scanning the room. For a moment, their gazes locked. She tilted her head, curious, not recognizing him, not yet, but noticing. She leaned over and whispered something to Lucy, who turned to look too. Richard offered a small wave. Tentative, respectful. Lana smiled. Not fully, not like a child greeting a parent, but more like someone remembering a kind face from a dream. Lucy gave a cautious wave back. It lasted only seconds before Margaret ushered them toward the doors, but for Richard, it was everything. Later that night, back in his high-rise apartment, he stood at the window overlooking the Boston skyline. Lights sparkled like stars across the darkened city, but his thoughts were thousands of miles away from real estate and mergers. They were with the little girl who played the violin, the two who brought a skit to life, and the woman who had protected them when he hadn't known they existed. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Margaret. "Thank you. Tonight meant the world. I'll wait for the next step whenever you feel it's right." The reply came almost immediately. They noticed you. Lila asked who the man in the back was. I said he was a friend of their mom's. For now. Richard sat down slowly, his heart full of a new kind of hope. Not the kind built on plans or deals, but on moments, tiny flickers of recognition that, if nurtured carefully, could become something lasting. The weeks that followed were filled with cautious footsteps toward something resembling connection. Margaret allowed brief updates, short glimpses into the girls' routines. Through her, Richard learned that Lila had joined a youth orchestra, that Lucy was helping lead a robotics project at school, and that Lana had taken to painting sunsets and hanging her work in the living room window, where the light could catch it just right. Though the girls still didn't know who he truly was, Richard found quiet ways to show up, not as a father, but as a consistent presence. He donated anonymously to their school's music program after learning Lila's violin was a loaner. He sponsored new equipment for Lucy's robotics team and paid for Lana's art class when Margaret confided she was considering dropping it due to budget constraints. He never asked for credit. He just wanted to be useful. Present. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Margaret called unexpectedly. "They're asking more questions," she said, "about you." Richard held his breath. "Last night, Lana drew a picture of you." Margaret continued, her voice softer now. "You were standing in the back of the auditorium watching them. She remembered your face, said you had kind eyes." He didn't know what to say. The idea that he had made an impression, however subtle, left him stunned. "I haven't told them anything concrete," Margaret added, "but I think they're ready to know more, at least about your history with Evelyn." Richard's chest tightened at the mention of her name. Evelyn Weston, the woman he'd loved fiercely, then lost completely. He could still see her eyes when she smiled, the quiet brilliance in her laugh, the steady courage in the way she had chosen to raise 3 daughters on her own. He cleared his throat. "If you're willing, I'd be honored to tell them." The plan was simple. Margaret invited Richard to join them for dinner one evening. Not a formal introduction, just a shared meal where stories might unfold naturally. The girls were told he was someone from their mother's past, a kind friend who'd known her before they were born. The living room was warm when he arrived. Art projects decorated the walls. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air. Richard had brought a book of old photographs, college years mostly, and a few candid shots of Evelyn from the early days. Nothing too personal, but enough to ground their shared history in truth. The girls greeted him with polite curiosity, each in their own distinct way. Lila offered a soft smile. Lana gave him a quick nod, and Lucy asked if he liked trivia. He said yes, and she promptly challenged him to a game after dinner. Over the meal, conversation flowed more easily than he expected. Margaret asked him to share a story about Evelyn, and he did. About the time they'd gotten caught in a summer downpour on the Harvard quad, laughing like children, soaked to the bone, but refusing to run for cover. "She always said rain wasn't something to run from," Richard said, his voice low. "She thought getting a little wet was a good reminder that we're alive." Lana's fork paused midair. "She used to say that to us," she murmured. "About the rain." Richard smiled. Then she still believed it. After dessert, Lucy led him to the bookshelf to find trivia cards, while Lila lingered behind. She sat beside him quietly, her gaze thoughtful. Did you love our mom? She asked suddenly, eyes not accusing, just searching. Yes, Richard said without hesitation. Very much. Lila nodded once, as if that answer had settled something for her. Later that night, after hugs and waves goodbye, Margaret walked him to the door. They like you, she said. I can see it happening. I don't want to push, Richard replied. They deserve to set the pace. Margaret hesitated. Do you still want to tell them the truth? About who you are? He looked back toward the apartment, where laughter still echoed faintly through the hall. Yes, he said quietly, but not as a surprise. When they're ready, when they ask. Margaret nodded. I think that day is closer than you realize. As he stepped into the cool night, Richard felt a quiet, growing hope, not born of entitlement or expectation, but of faith. Faith that one day, 3 remarkable little girls might see him not just as a man from their mother's past, but as part of their future. Of all the memories Richard held of Evelyn, there was one he hadn't spoken about yet. Not to Margaret, not even to himself in a conscious way. It was buried deep, wrapped in the scent of cinnamon and late autumn air, tucked away like an unopened letter, in a drawer full of regrets. But as the season shifted and Thanksgiving approached, something in him stirred, as if it were time to bring that memory to light. Margaret called on a Tuesday afternoon. The girls want to invite you to Thanksgiving, she said. Just a small gathering here at home. I told them it was up to you. Richard was silent for a moment, caught off guard by the invitation. It wasn't the meal itself. It was the meaning, the symbolism. Holidays were sacred things, especially for children who had endured so much loss. Being included meant something different now. It meant belonging, even if the label hadn't been spoken yet. I'd love to, he replied, heart pounding slightly. That Thursday, he stood outside their brownstone with a nervous flutter in his chest and a homemade pie in his hands. He hadn't baked in years, but he remembered Evelyn's recipe, the one with tart apples and just a hint of nutmeg. He hoped the girls would like it, even if it wasn't perfect. The apartment buzzed with warmth. Laughter from the kitchen, the clink of silverware being set on the table. Lucy was arranging place cards with calligraphy pens. Lila was stirring something on the stove with deep concentration, and Lana was humming softly as she sketched on a corner notepad, her thoughts clearly drifting into a world of color and shape. Richard stepped into the light of it all and felt something almost like awe. You brought a pie, Margaret noted with a smile. I tried, he said, sheepish. Evelyn's recipe. I hope it's close. Lana's ears perked. Mom used to make apple pie with nutmeg. She said cinnamon was too obvious, Richard replied with a small grin. All 3 girls looked at him, something unspoken passing between them. Dinner was easy, surprisingly so. Margaret had done wonders with a small dining space. Candles flickered in jars. A playlist of classical piano filled the silences. There was turkey and mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce shaped like the can it came from, because, as Lucy insisted, it tastes better that way. And laughter that grew louder with every shared story. But it was after the dishes were cleared, when everyone sat full and mellow, that the shift began. Can we ask you something? Lila's voice broke the quiet. She looked older than her years in that moment. Anything, Richard said, setting down his mug of cider. How did you and Mom meet? He paused, caught in the delicate space between truth and story, and chose to share what mattered most. We met in Boston, he began, at a writer's workshop she was leading. I was supposed to be working on a memoir that never quite made it to the page, and she walked in like the whole room belonged to her, not because she demanded it, but because she carried this light with her. People noticed. I noticed. Lucy leaned forward. Did you love her then? I think I started to. The moment she asked me what I was most afraid to write about. They listened in silence as he told them about the cafe on Tremont Street, where they'd shared their first real conversation. About the letter she never mailed, but had tucked inside a book of poems. He spoke with reverence, not as a man staking claim, but as someone grateful for having loved and been loved. When he stopped, the room was still. Then Lana stood and walked to a shelf where their mother's journals were kept. She pulled one down, flipped to a worn page, and handed it to him. She wrote about you, she said softly. We didn't understand it until now. Richard took the journal and read the familiar curve of Evelyn's handwriting. A passage about a man who made her laugh when she wanted to cry, who challenged her to be more honest on the page and off it. A man she let go, not because she wanted to, but because life had drawn a line she wasn't ready to cross. She always said we came from a place of love, Lila said, even if we didn't know the whole story. Richard looked at them, 3 young girls with their mother's fire and wisdom and grace, and felt his voice catch in his throat. You did, he whispered. You absolutely did. That night, as he stood to leave, Lana pressed something into his hand, a folded paper star. You should have something to remember this night, she said, like a keepsake. He opened it once outside, beneath the soft glow of the street lamp. Inside, in careful script, was written, Thank you for loving our mom, and for seeing us, too. Richard tucked the star into his coat pocket, heart full. He hadn't told them everything yet, not who he was, not what they meant to him, but tonight had brought them closer. And for now, that was enough. Winter had settled over Manhattan, draping the city in a quiet hush. The streets sparkled with early holiday lights, store windows dressed in gold and crimson. But for Richard Bennett, the season's glow came from somewhere entirely different. It had been nearly 3 months since that first fragile connection with the girls. What began as fleeting encounters had transformed into a rhythm of shared routines, unspoken trust, and moments stitched together with care. Still, one truth remained unsaid, lingering like a breath held too long. Richard had thought about telling them many times. At the ice rink, while steadying Hannah after a tumble. In the public library, when Haley proudly explained the Fibonacci sequence. Watching Lucy pore over old photographs and mouth the words of her favorite poem, one Evelyn had written. He'd come close, so close, but always stopped short, afraid of the delicate balance they'd all worked so hard to build. It was Margaret who finally confronted him, one chilly evening as he helped her carry groceries up the steps of their brownstone. They need to know, she said quietly, once the door closed behind them. He looked at her, exhausted by the weight of what he hadn't said. I'm afraid I'll lose them. You might, she admitted. But if you wait too long, you'll lose something worse, their trust. Richard nodded slowly. He'd been preparing for this moment in silence, collecting fragments of himself he wasn't sure he'd ever use again. Now, it was time to gather them into something whole. A few days later, he asked Margaret if he could take the girls to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was one of Evelyn's favorite places, a sanctuary of stories and stillness. Margaret agreed, her eyes searching his face for certainty. They arrived early, before the weekend crowds filled the echoing halls. Hannah clutched his hand as they entered the Temple of Dender, her breath fogging up the glass as she looked out at the reflecting pool. "It's like time stopped here," she whispered. Haley and Lucy trailed behind, sketchbooks in hand, their pencils already moving with curiosity and focus. Richard led them to a quieter gallery where a row of wooden benches sat before a wall of vibrant oil paintings, scenes of homecomings, goodbyes, and quiet in-betweens. "Can we sit for a minute?" he asked. They nodded and joined him. "I want to tell you a story," he began, voice steady despite the tremble beneath. "It's about a man who met a woman he loved and how he lost her before he really understood what that love could be." The girls looked up, eyes alert, listening. "She was brilliant," he continued. "She challenged him. She made him laugh when he forgot how. But the timing wasn't right, and he walked away. Not because he didn't care, but because he thought he had to chase something bigger." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, and years later, after her light had gone from the world, he stood by her grave and saw 3 girls who didn't know him, but who looked into his soul without a word. And in that moment, he knew. He knew who they were. The air went still. Haley was the first to speak. "It's not just a story, is it?" "No," Richard whispered. "It's ours." Lucy's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes were wet. Hannah reached into her coat and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "We found this last week," she said softly. "In one of Mom's books. It was a letter. She wrote about you." Richard felt his heart catch. "What did it say?" "That she hoped one day we'd meet you," Lucy said, finally finding her voice. "That she didn't want us to grow up without knowing the truth. She just didn't know how to make it work." There was no anger in her voice, just understanding, shaped by loss and tempered with grace. "I didn't know," Richard said. "For so long I didn't know. And when I did, I didn't want to force myself into your lives. I wanted to earn a place, not claim one." Haley looked down at her sketchbook. "You're already in it." The simplicity of her words nearly undid him. They sat there, the 4 of them, in a quiet circle framed by centuries of painted stories. Richard didn't cry, but his heart softened in a way it hadn't in years. Lucy leaned against his arm. Hannah held his hand. Haley slid her sketchbook into his lap, open to a drawing. 3 girls on a bench, their silhouettes leaning toward a man at the center. He didn't need to ask who it was. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full of something healing, something new. And in that sacred space, the truth no longer stood between them. It belonged to them now, together. The air inside the apartment was still, carrying the quiet that often follows a great shift. After the museum, the truth sat between them like an invisible thread, gentle, unspoken, yet undeniably present. Richard had returned the girls home in silence, letting the weight of their shared moment speak for itself. He hadn't stayed for dinner that evening, and Margaret hadn't asked him to. She saw it in his face. He needed time. Time to absorb what had finally been released. But it wasn't silence that filled the next day. It was Lucy's voice, humming as she colored. It was Haley tapping her pencil as she made a list of questions to ask about the Bennett side of the family. And it was Hannah, quietly tucking her locket beneath her shirt, then pulling it out again, fingers brushing over the engraved words like a secret only she could hold. Richard felt the change in them before he even stepped inside the apartment that Saturday. He was met not with polite curiosity or guarded glances, but with something closer to comfort. Not ease, perhaps, but the beginnings of it. He had brought with him a thick scrapbook, not filled with childhood photos. He had none of those, but pages he had curated with care. Photographs of his parents, his childhood home in Boston, old family recipes, newspaper clippings about Evelyn's published essays, handwritten notes from her students, maps, postcards, even a few pages of his own journal entries from the early days of his career. "It's not much," he said as he laid the book on the table, "but it's a start." Haley opened it first, her analytical eyes scanning each page with the focus of a historian uncovering lost truths. "You were in the debate club," she said, pointing to a photo of Richard at 16, arms crossed, standing next to a chalkboard, "and captain of the math team," he added with a laugh. "Which explains my terrible fashion choices," Lucy giggled, leaning in. "You had braces." "Very badly," he nodded. "For 4 years. Hannah ran her fingers along a page with a postcard from Venice. "Did you go here with Mom?" "No," Richard said quietly. "I went there after we lost touch. But I remember telling her once that I dreamed of seeing it. I guess I just needed to go and see it for both of us." They fell into silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was reverent. A kind of shared respect for what had been lost and what was slowly being found. Later that afternoon, the 4 of them ventured out to Riverside Park. It was chilly, but the girls insisted they walk instead of take the car. They wanted to show him something, a spot they used to come with Evelyn, a bench near the river where she would read to them, sketch in her notebook, or simply sit with all 3 pressed against her sides. She called it her quiet place, Lucy said, pointing to the bench, now slightly worn, with initials carved into the wood. "I brought something," Richard said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bronze plaque, wrapped in velvet. "What's that?" Hannah asked. "I had it made this week. I wasn't sure if it would be okay, but—" He unwrapped it and held it out. The inscription read, "In loving memory of Evelyn Walsh, brilliant mind, gentle soul, beloved mother. In this quiet place, her love endures." Lucy's lips parted, emotion rising to the surface. Haley ran her hand over the metal. "Can we put it here?" "I already asked the Parks Department," Richard said. "They approved it." The girls looked at one another, then nodded. Together, the 4 of them knelt to affix it beneath the bench seat. No ceremony, no speeches, just a shared act of remembrance. They sat for a while afterward, shoulders brushing, faces turned toward the river as the sun dipped low, casting amber light across the water. It was the kind of moment Evelyn would have loved. Simple, honest, full, and it was Hannah who broke the silence, her voice soft but sure. "Can we call you Dad?" Richard turned, startled. Lucy was watching him closely, her arms folded, but not in defense. Haley looked away, blinking quickly. Hannah met his gaze again. "We've talked about it," she added. "A lot." He took a breath, felt the fullness rise in his chest like it might burst. "Only if you want to," he said, barely able to get the words out. "Only if you're ready." "We are," Haley said, her voice breaking just slightly. Lucy didn't speak, but she reached for his hand and held it tightly in her small one. That was enough. And just like that, something shifted. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of something long overdue finally falling into place. They stayed on that bench until the sky deepened and the lights of the city flickered on around them. A father and his daughters, not perfect, not whole, but together. And for now, that was everything. Winter had arrived in New York, blanketing the city in white and drawing people indoors with scarves wrapped high and laughter fogging up coffee shop windows. It was the kind of season Evelyn had always loved, the kind where she would let the girls skip their last hour of school to watch snow fall from their bedroom window, cocoa in hand, blankets draped around their shoulders. Richard remembered the way she had described that once in one of the journal entries Charlotte had shared with him. She wrote that her daughters reminded her that quiet moments often carried the most magic. That winter, Richard found himself building his life around quiet magic. Saturday outings had become a tradition, but now they weren't just activities or distractions. They were invitations. Invitations into the world of three young girls who, only months ago, had stared at him from behind an oak tree without knowing who he was. And now they called him Dad. The transformation hadn't been sudden, nor had it been without pain. There were nights Lucy would still fall silent at dinner, stirring her pasta but not eating. Mornings when Haley's anxiety would keep her in bed longer than usual, and evenings when Hannah would curl up in the corner of her room with her sketchbook, eyes misty as she drew the same picture over and over. Their family bench by the river, Evelyn's name glowing softly from its plaque. But Richard didn't run from these moments. He showed up, always. When Hannah had her first ballet recital since her mother's passing, Richard was there, front row, flowers in hand, clapping until his hands stung. When Haley entered her science fair, he stayed up 2 nights helping her build a model of the solar system, even though he hadn't touched a glue gun in 20 years. And when Lucy quietly asked if she could attend the local poetry reading at the public library, he cleared his calendar without hesitation and sat in the back as she read her own verses, voice trembling but powerful. Their home life began to shift as well. Charlotte, ever protective, had taken a step back. She still came by, often joining them for dinner, always watching closely. But even she acknowledged the change. "They need you now," she told Richard one evening, as they watched the girls decorate sugar cookies in the kitchen. "Not just as a figure, as their father. And you've become that." Richard had prepared a room for each of them in his newly renovated apartment on the Upper West Side. Each space reflected their uniqueness. Hannah's, with ballet bars and lavender tones. Haley's, with maps, microscopes, and constellations. And Lucy's, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a small writing desk beneath a window. He had also added one more room, a quiet library with 2 soft reading chairs and a fireplace where they could sit with memories of Evelyn, whose presence was still stitched into the fabric of everything. One evening, as snow fell gently outside and the girls were tangled in blankets watching an old holiday movie, Richard sat beside them, not as an outsider, but as something long overdue. He looked over and saw that Lucy was already asleep, her head against his shoulder. Haley was focused on the screen, whispering facts under her breath. Hannah, curled beside him, whispered, "Mom would have liked you." His throat tightened, but he managed to whisper back, "I hope so." She looked up at him, her gaze clear. She would have. In the months that followed, they continued to build something not perfect, but real. A life that honored the past and created new meaning in the present. A family. And one spring morning, exactly 1 year after Evelyn's funeral, They returned to the cemetery. This time, they came not just to mourn, but to speak. Each girl brought something to lay at her grave: a pressed flower from Hannah, a handwritten letter from Lucy, and a science ribbon from Haley's most recent competition. Richard stood behind them, letting them lead. And when they had finished, they turned to him, eyes steady, and asked if he had anything to say. He stepped forward, knelt by the stone, and placed a photograph down, one taken just days before, of all four of them sitting on the river bench, smiling in the late afternoon light. "I don't know what kind of father I would have been back then," he said, his voice low, "but I know who I want to be now. I'm late, Evelyn, so late, but I'm here, and I'm staying." The girls each took one of his hands. No more secrets, no more distance, just a father and his daughters, together, finally, in the quiet corners of a bustling city, hidden behind skyscrapers and boardrooms. A story of love, loss, and rediscovery unfolded. One that was never meant to begin the way it did, but perhaps needed to. Richard Bennett, a man once consumed by ambition, success, and solitude, believed his life had already played out its course. After the death of the only woman who ever truly knew him, he stood by her grave, mourning not only the loss of Evelyn, but the life they might have had together, until fate presented him with something unimaginable. 3 identical 8-year-old girls watching him from a distance, unaware they were looking at their father. What began as a mysterious encounter in a cemetery grew into the unraveling of a past he'd buried beneath years of corporate walls and silence. With every discovery, from Evelyn's unspoken sacrifice to the existence of Lucy, Haley, and Hannah, Richard's world was turned inside out. He went from a man of wealth and detachment to someone desperate to connect, not to control. The journey wasn't easy. There were walls to climb, trust to earn, and wounds that time alone could never heal. But through quiet dinners, Saturday outings, snowflake-covered ice skating lessons, and bedtime stories, a bond began to form, not through blood, but through effort, vulnerability, and presence. Each of the girls, unique in personality, yet bound by the same loss, taught Richard something he had never learned in boardrooms: patience, resilience, and the irreplaceable value of being there, truly there. He didn't try to replace Evelyn. He honored her. He didn't force love. He waited for it. And over time, it came, not in grand declarations, but in the quiet way Hannah reached for his hand, in the trust Haley gave him with her questions, and in the solemn approval of Lucy's nod when he showed up again and again. This story wasn't just about a man finding his daughters. It was about 3 little girls finding someone who refused to walk away. It was about how love, even when buried for years, can be unearthed, reshaped, and reborn. And most importantly, it was a reminder that family isn't just who you're born to. It's who shows up when it matters most. Sometimes, life doesn't give us second chances. It gives us the gift of showing up late but loving fiercely. If you've ever questioned whether it's too late to reconnect, to rebuild, or to right a wrong, Richard's story is proof that it's never too late to choose love, presence, and healing. We all make mistakes. We all miss signs. But it's what we do after that defines who we are. So, today, take a moment. Call someone you've drifted from. Apologize if you need to. Show up, even if you're late, because someone out there might still be waiting to let you in. If you were in Richard's shoes, what would you do first? A. Tell the triplets immediately that you're their father. B. Wait and build trust before revealing the truth. Drop your answer A or B in the comments below. And we want to hear from you. What did this story make you feel? Have you ever experienced something that reminded you of this? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can all reflect together. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and support the channel. It keeps us inspired to bring you more powerful, emotional stories like this. Until next time, thank you for being here.